live today. What we're going to talk about is emotional intelligence for leaders. And so hopefully that's what you knew you were signing up for. I'm going to talk for a few minutes. We'll probably go for about half an hour today. If you have any questions as we go through, don't hesitate to speak up, raise your hand, put them in the chat, and we will get those addressed. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As I do that, my name is Robin Camero. I am a leadership development trainer and an executive coach. And every week I do these free workshops really just to kind of engage with people like yourselves who care about these things as much as I do, and believe that with a little bit of information and some practice and maybe some input from other like-minded people that we can all get better. So that's why I do this. And so I often find that I learn as much from you all as I do kind of putting the slides together and doing the research. All right, so as I said, today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence for leaders. I'm certain this is a topic you're very familiar with. It has been something we've been talking about for nearly 20 years now. But what I wanted to really hone in on today is how you can use your emotional intelligence in your leadership role, not only to benefit yourself, but also to encourage your team to use their, build and use their emotional intelligence as well. So this is really about how you can lead by example, enhance your own leadership capabilities, improve the team dynamics, and build a positive work culture. So that's what we're going to do. So welcome. I am so glad you're here. And as I mentioned, you know, I'll kind of start with a reflection question. It's the same question I start all of these webinars with, and to me, it helps anchor us in why we do this work. So I'll talk about that in a moment. I will share a little bit of information on what emotional intelligence for leaders is and how you might build that. And then, as I mentioned, I left some time at the end for some discussion if you have any questions. All right, so getting right to it, that question that I always ask, that I always come back to for myself, and what I think everyone here is really motivated by, is really, what do you want most for your team? And I'll pause and kind of let you think about that for a moment. What do you want most for your team? I think in our heart as leaders, this is really what we are just constantly searching for, is just, you know, and it's different often for many of us, but kind of getting focused on what do you want for them? Who is the leader that you want to be, so that then they can do their best work? So pause for a moment. You can just kind of think about it, maybe make a little note for yourself. And I would just encourage you to keep that in mind as we go through the slides today. All right. So to get us started, you know, Daniel Goleman is the author who wrote the book on emotional intelligence back in 1995. He kind of kicked off this, this understanding that we have that I think a lot of us kind of intuitively felt, but he kind of put some words to it. So emotional intelligence, as he defines it, is the ability to recognize, assess, control, and utilize your own emotions and those of others. And he argues that is the underlying factor in being more successful in life, and of course at work, which is why we're here. I think that's pretty powerful. You know, above all of the other skills that we pursue professionally, you know, his argument is really that emotional intelligence is at the root. So the qualities in emotionally intelligent leaders are here on this matrix. And so you can kind of think about it in terms of kind of your personal competence, so how you manage yourself, and then your relationship competence, kind of how you interact with others. So there's knowledge, there's just things that you are aware of, but then there's also, then once you have that awareness alone isn't the only thing you need then some ability to manage that. So I'll just kind of briefly talk through these. So if you think about your personal competence and your knowledge, having that knowledge of yourself, that ability to accurately assess yourself, and then from that, having self-confidence. On the management side, so with that basis of knowledge, that ability to have emotional self-control, you know, so you've probably worked for somebody in your career, or just at least observed them, those people who just fly off the handle and are just unpredictable. I have, and it was one of the most stressful times in my career because you just never knew what to expect. And that can be really unsettling, I think, for the people on our teams. It's just to not know what they're walking into every day when they get on the phone with you or come into your office. It's really, it can just be incredibly distracting for teams. So that ability to have emotional self-control, of course, integrity, that drive to achieve, adaptability, initiative and innovation, and this learning orientation, a growth mindset. All right, so that's on the personal side. Yeah, Daryl, did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't remember as well as I used to. Are we going to get these slides or?
Yeah, I would be happy to share the slides. Sure thing.
All right, because I'm like, this is great stuff, and I'm not going to retain all of this. So,
Yeah, no,
But-
absolutely. I'll have the recording, and I'd be happy to share the slides.
Thank
And
you
then,
so much.
hi, how are you? I just see that is that Kathy?
It is.
Oh, hey, Kathy, how
For
are you
some
doing?
reason, hi, good. For some reason, when I join on my personal computer, it comes up as my board committee's email. But really, I was registering on behalf of the board of directors for Lake Holiday Country Club, Inc. So
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad to see you. And I think it's great to have two friendly, familiar faces here. So as we go through this, please jump in with any thoughts or anything that you would like to add, because Kathy, you are incredibly knowledgeable and skilled in this as well. So
awesome. Sorry if there's background noise. I was trying to find my headsets and I can't find them.
No, it's all good. All right.
Okay.
So on kind of the relational competence, so this awareness of others, the ability, having empathy, yes, that servant mind, or, you've probably heard of servant leadership, but a service orientation, that organizational acumen, knowing kind of like how to navigate your network and the hierarchy, that appreciation of diversity. So on the management side, the ability to communicate, develop others, facilitate team performance, manage conflict, influence people, create change, and just be that inspiring leader. So these are just a big laundry list of all the qualities in emotionally intelligent leaders. All right. So, I think it's helpful to kind of think about how these things fit together, because sometimes we think about emotional intelligence in that silo of ourselves, but it's really about how we act, how we interact with other people, and how we lead change. And mindfulness kind of it says mindfulness, which sometimes I feel like, has a certain connotation, but it's that awareness, having awareness of how you show up in each one of those areas is the key here to what we're going to talk about next, which is really how you build this. So this is what I find fascinating, is that emotional intelligence is not at all about suppressing or ignoring negative emotions. I think sometimes we think about it like, oh, I just need to be happy and positive, but it's not that at all. That's not human. And that is certainly not the experience most of us have at work. So we bring our full selves to work, and we are subject to all different kinds of emotional reactions at work. So being emotionally intelligent doesn't mean that you don't have negative emotions. What it does mean, though, is that we can recognize when they happen. We can kind of see them coming or recognize once we're there. And then rather than just pushing them aside or pushing them down, skilled leaders are able to recognize and process those negative emotions in a more constructive way. So they're not turning that on themselves in a self-critical, damaging way, and they're also not doing that out to their teams. And so when we're able to better acknowledge, address our negative emotions, we can cultivate a more supportive and empathetic environment. And that's what really encourages that open communication, trust, and resilience among team members. So that ability to have some predictability in how you respond, and just that feeling that, like, if I come to you, Daryl, with a problem, that you're not going to freak out, like we're going to figure it out together. So just to really underscore this point, this is not at all about just staying positive all the time. It's really about bringing some awareness and that ability to kind of manage yourself before it kind of leaks out all over everyone else. So this is that blind spot that I find so fascinating. This is the disconnect. So when the Journal of Applied Psychology did this massive study, they found that when they, they had a set of questions and they rated people on their on their emotional intelligence, and only 18% of people this is in a work setting, only 18% of people demonstrated that emotional intelligence at work. When they asked people, though, their perception of themselves, 80% of people rated themselves as having above average emotional intelligence. So to me, what this means is there's this disconnect between how we see ourselves and how we actually show up. And it's pretty significant. So this is a blind spot for so many of us, us personally, but also the people on our team. When you think you're showing up, when you think you're in tune with your emotions and kind of showing up in one way, but in fact, the real impact of that is very different. So it's a blind spot to just bring awareness to for ourselves, but also to bring awareness to our teams. So it's still important though, because the other thing I think as leaders to understand is that when we hone these emotional intelligence skills, and people who have high emotional intelligence earn more and are more attractive candidates. So this is interesting for us, to the extent that we're in the job market looking for something, but it also means that those people on your team with high emotional intelligence will tend to be those people who can command a higher salary, and they're going to be more attractive to all different kinds of employers. So just having some awareness that those can be the people that are most highly valued within our work setting. So one of the things that then, after we have this conversation, I think people get really curious about is like, okay, well, if I think I'm pretty emotionally intelligent, but how do I know? Well, I think there's certainly, you can do some journaling and you can do some reflection. You can ask people for feedback. One of the things I think is super interesting, and Daryl, to your point about sharing these slides, this is one that'll be really useful. There are a number of different free emotional intelligence assessments or little quizzes that you can take to kind of put a number to that. Now, I personally to the extent that you have time, I think it's useful to kind of do a couple of them and kind of see how you score. I also encourage people to take these because it's interesting. It can be a baseline, but also to not take them completely as gospel. I think there's some subjectivity certainly that we introduce when we respond to a quiz like this or a survey like this. So I don't know that it's something that you can put on your resume as like, okay, I got this score, but it's just to bring some awareness to those qualities that impact emotional intelligence in some areas that you may want to consider developing. It could also be a team building exercise if it's set up in the appropriate way. So if you wanted to have a conversation with your team about emotional intelligence and why you think it's important and how to improve it, this could be a starting point for you to share one of these free tools with them. Everybody agrees to take it. You can kind of to let people know they can share their scores or not make it mandatory in any way. But really kind of encourage people to get curious about their own emotional intelligence, and these quizzes can be a way to do that.
But this could, in my opinion, open up a can of worms, though. I mean, you might find out that some of your people on your team are on the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's why you would set it up in a way that it would make it clear that the results in no way tie to their performance. It doesn't become part of it's completely disconnected from any of their the HR official records. And actually, it would probably be a good idea to touch base with HR to kind of let them know that you were interested in doing this and make sure it was kind of framed in the appropriate way. So and to make it totally optional. We never want people to feel like they're being subjected to any of these kind of studies. It's just like, hey, I took this one. I thought it was kind of interesting. Here's what I got out of it. If you're also interested in this stuff, it's totally up to you. I think that's more the framing than making any of these mandatory, especially because they are so subjective that you have to be really careful about how you interpret the results. Because when we read the questions, it's so easy to you can read the question and know what the right answer is, and it's hard at times not to just kind of like, well, I think I am most of that, and kind of it can skew more positively. So anyway, so I do share these because I think I personally find this kind of stuff really interesting, but I only recommend it kind of with that big caveat that to just be aware of some of the subjectivity and some of the limitations. All right, so so some ideas about how you can lead by example and develop more emotional intelligence for the folks on your team. So I think this, I like kind of breaking things down into, a couple of step process, but, so I think this is all about the culture that you're creating, or kind of the vibe, or what it feels like to work with you and to be on your team. So creating a positive and inclusive team culture, that could mean, there's any number of activities that you could imagine doing to actually accomplish that. So a couple of ideas about, fostering psychological safety, being really encouraging and open to communications and actively listening and promoting empathy and understanding. Those are like a lot of words, but that's like when you show up in a meeting, like, are you soliciting people's input and then pausing to like really hear what they have to say, or just kind of politely waiting for them to finish so that then you can kind of jump in with your next point? I have like completely been guilty of that. Just in like my eagerness to kind of like get things done and kind of move things forward, but reminding myself to just kind of pause, really try to create that space for open communication and really listen. And this idea of psychological safety, of just anything, making people feel, or creating an environment where people feel like they can kind of say anything. I mean, within the appropriate work context, but like in terms of ideas that they want to share, or challenges that they're seeing, like it's all okay to share. They are, and there's no, no bad questions either. So they're just creating the space where people won't be criticized or shut down for when they open up. Okay, so that's all about that positive and inclusive team culture. The next one is this self-awareness. Yeah.
If you as a leader screw up that first one, you violate somebody's trust, it's over. It's a wrap. I mean,
yeah.
So
yeah.
So they got to really focus on listening and giving and encouraging and reinforcing them to open up, even if the response is what you consider a dumb one. You got to foster that, because the moment they feel like, well, if I say something, he's going to call me out, you can forget it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, people shut down. I mean, then they, it can be so painful that it only takes once. For some people, it only takes one experience like that for them to say, like, I'm not going to say anything because of what happened before. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's incredibly difficult to come back from that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this next one in terms of kind of developing that self-awareness, we kind of just talked about this a little bit, but finding ways that work for you to build that self-awareness, knowing that we all have this tendency to view ourselves perhaps a little bit more aware and a little bit more positively than the actual impact. And that's why, asking for feedback, and asking for input on how we're being received, whether it's in a meeting or, after leading a big project or whatever, but really kind of getting, having other people, inviting them to help kind of see some of our blind spots and getting that self-awareness. There are the tools that we just talked about. There's all kinds of different kinds of assessments that you can do that. But kind of treating this as like an ongoing journey in your career is just to constantly build this awareness about how you're coming across. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know of anybody, I can't remember the last time I've heard anybody ask for feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, some cultures it's I think you're exactly right. In some work cultures, it's really uncommon, which is unfortunate. But I think, Daryl, that could be something that you could. It only takes a couple people to lead by example and start doing that, and demonstrate how open you are to receiving that feedback. Be like, yeah, I hear that. Thanks for sharing that. Because I think that would be really powerful and kind of set the example for what other people could do.
And so my previous employer, But they were really big on a lot of surveys
Mhm.
that would come through your email, and they would ask questions and want you to give feedback on a whole bunch of things, including your team up and down the food chain, if you know what I'm saying. But what would give me pause is the questions that precede that. How long you been with the company? What organization, what department? And I was thinking, well, they're trying to identify. I mean, I always say, well, you don't have to identify yourself, but there's ways to identify,
Yeah. Yeah.
based on your responses. I'm like, well, I'm not saying the truth, because it's a strongly agree, strongly disagree to 1 through 5. I'm like, well, come on, I'm
Yeah.
in the middle, because I know that at some point there's a chance that my boss is going to see this,
Right.
because he knows I've been there 3 years. I work in this organization, and it's easy to figure, well, that's Daryl.
Right. Right. Well, and that's I mean, and I think what you're talking about really erodes people's confidence in some of these surveys, because if you're worried about your anonymity, or, just any kind of repercussions from it, then nobody's going to answer those honestly. And so the usefulness is diminished, I think, in that case. Now, I think it depends on, like, we do a lot of work with the FEB survey, just as an example, with the federal government, so that's massive. And, when you have a huge sample size with hundreds and potentially thousands of people, then I think you can feel maybe a little bit more confident that it's going to be tougher to kind of single you out. But if you're in a smaller organization or a group, then that's a real concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just briefly, I think this other thing, just enhancing social awareness. I was doing a meeting just a couple of months ago where somebody piped up and said, well, just sometimes I just have a bad day, and it's bit like, and it came across as defensive, because basically he was being a jerk and wanted his jerky behavior to be excused because he was having a bad day, so he could come in and kind of like be nasty with people. And that's not okay. Like, I think going back to what we said before, it's not about all having, positive emotions, but understanding how your emotions and your attitudes kind of spill out on other people, and having some awareness about that, how that impacts the group dynamic, is really important. And so raising some awareness, both in the team setting, and then in his particular case, I think, pulling him aside in a private one-on-one to just, bring some of his awareness to the impact on the just on the feeling of being on the team because of his kind of negative attitude. Yeah. Okay. And so lastly, just improving relationship management. I mean, relationships are just what underpins our business, and, makes everything possible. And having some, making that kind of as important in your team's mind as it really is in the business, that putting their relationships first and doing what they need to do to kind of sustain healthy, productive relationships is one of their most important jobs. So, all right, I have a couple more. So, I think, Daryl, you kind of highlighted some of these, but when you go in to start talking about building emotional intelligence with your team, there can be skeptics. And, I totally get that. One, I was talking to a client the other day. She's like, as soon as I got on the phone, she's like, am I going to have to talk about my feelings? Like, we kind of laughed about it. She was laughing. But, so, some of this can be unfamiliar, uncomfortable for people. Of course, there are people that just feel, hey, we should just be kind of focused on the work and not kind of talking about this stuff. So in those cases where you're bumping into some skepticism or some resistance to doing this kind of work, you can certainly do some education and awareness, just helping people understand kind of what the studies say. If they're a data person, they might like to see those, and kind of, showing them some of the research that's out there, providing some concrete examples. I think, to the extent that you can cite something that happened maybe in the business where there was a really good example of somebody demonstrating emotional intelligence. Maybe there was a great email that came down from the boss that really, from the CEO or something that really demonstrated some self-awareness, like providing some concrete examples for people. It helps. doing some training and development programs that's fostering that supportive culture that we talked about before, where, people are psychologically safe and they can, there's that two-way communication. Personalizing the approach. Now, this is something you can do in your one-on-ones with people to help them, just build their awareness about, how do they prioritize? Sometimes this can be overwhelming. So if there was just one thing you were going to start in terms of your awareness, maybe it's like, hey, how you're showing up in meetings. Sometimes, with the look on your face, I think you're, not fully bought into our solution. I would, did you know that you were doing that? Like, can we personalize it a little bit more so that people so it can be tangible for them? And then, we all like measuring and just communicating results. And so looking at some of the, before and after, whether you do a pre-survey and an after survey, or you kind of look at the general business metrics, or just having people kind of just get a kind of a more qualitative assessment of like, what does it feel like to be on our team? Do we feel like people are more tuned in to kind of how their emotions are impacting us? And then, talking about that openly. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end here. So I just wanted to close with this idea that increasing your emotional intelligence, this is both for you and for the folks on your team, really unlocks the power within you to understand, connect, and positively influence the world around you. I just believe so wholeheartedly in this work, and just really appreciate you all joining me this afternoon to kind of go through this. And I'll just pause there right at 12:30 and just see if there are any questions or any other thoughts, maybe something that I missed.
I just want to add that when I was a leader at Northrop Grumman, they used to do a 360 analysis from a leader perspective. So they would actually ask members of your team to score you, which was interesting. Always got kind of a little frightening, but it was kind of amazing what people provided. And I found I had a couple of people on my team that weren't very engaged and seemed to kind of be undermining the team's effectiveness. And when I actually sat down, it was very transparent about what feedback I received and kind of how I interpreted it. I validated that interpretation with them and said, here's what my plan is, I think, to fix some things that you see as holes in my leadership abilities. It lowered people's shoulders. It got them much more engaged. And because I think they felt I was being much more authentic and realistic. And then I did do what you recommend about measuring and kind of checking in to say, hey, are we seeing improvements here? Or am I giving you what you need? Are you being recognized enough? Because everybody has these different needs. Some people didn't want to be recognized or pointed out or anything like, so don't ever, give me an award in a big conference room. So,
right.
And that was kind of what the feedback was, is one size doesn't fit all for both recognition and the way you are tasked and the way you feel like you're appreciated for the work product. So I thought that was really good to be transparent with them and kind of bring them along the leadership journey. And from that, we actually raised several leaders, including my replacement, which was pretty cool.
Oh, I love that story. And, and because Kathy, I think that's so powerful when you can demonstrate your ability to kind of to really hear feedback and not fall apart and not freak out and not get defensive.
It took me a day. I actually left work, went home. It's like, because it is kind of a shocker when people are that honest with you. So I needed time to emotionally interpret it and then decide how I was going to engage it. And then it was a more positive thing. But I think you can take if you get a bad review, like that's not a good day. And I think it's always good, like if you're giving people bad news, you should let them leave the workplace. And I did that day. It was my very first 360. I'd never had one of those before. And we were in a very, very busy time with the organization I worked within. It was in the intelligence community post 9/11. Work was flowing in, emotions, and obviously our mission was very taxing on everybody. So a lot of those dynamics were involved. So, but I did need time to take time to reflect. And I think also I made decisions early on based on leaders from a modeling perspective. There's some that were very emotionally disconnected. I had one that was more of a mom and she befriended everybody. And they were almost too close of relationships out inside and outside of work. So she had kind of picked favorites or pets. And I had to determine, okay, of all those examples I've seen in my own personal career, what do I want to be? And I just found a balance of those things where you could see when somebody's having a bad day, and you would, like you said, instead of having it be confrontational at the meeting, if you're noticing their heads down and they're looking at their feet and they look upset, usually they're more pale, like sometimes they just got bad news. You don't know what their baggage they're bringing into that room. So I would often, and I guess that's just also leadership ability, you would see something's wrong and hopefully pull them aside and say, hey, are you okay? Like physically, emotionally, is there something going on that you need to sort or deal with right now, as opposed to being in this meeting? Because if they're not going to be able to participate and contribute, then let them off the hook at least that day. So that you don't get the guy saying, just let me have a bad day and be angry and grumbling at people. That's not very effective.
Right, right. Yeah, so much. I just heard so many, I think, I'll use the word best practices, which is like not the right word, but like there's so many bits of that example, I think, that demonstrate how emotionally tuned in you were to yourself. So knowing like this feedback hit me hard, which like that's human right there. So that's like completely normal. But knowing like you had to take yourself out of the situation, like process a little bit, maybe talk to your spouse, like whatever you do to like kind of get your head around it. And then, then your ability to kind of come back, but also to be able to read people and know that like, hey, there's something going on here. I really either need to find out what it is or not push too hard, or just being really sensitive to, just the diversity of needs of, people on our team. So so much greatness in that example, Kathy. Thank you. So, well, good. All right, Daryl, anything from you before we hang up?
Yeah, I just wanted to just clarify that today in my career and for the last decade or so, I've been an individual contributor in most of my professional settings. However, I've always been able to, I would say, lead from behind or lead from the troops in those settings, because what I was able to do was to quickly establish respect within the organization, because that's what I gave in return, was total respect. And it always came back to me, and it enabled me to do what I do, and that is encourage people to be their best, but also showing that I'm just as vulnerable as they are. But when I was in leadership, it was actually it was a time that I would never forget. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I found myself working for this government contractor years ago, where there were still word processing pools, and they were being transitioned to the personal computer.
Yep.
And so my job was to bring them into the, to the future. And
Right.
there was
Change management at its finest, right?
Yeah, it's like, well, who is this guy? And by the way, they were all white women. They were moms, they were aunts, they were sisters who, and in this city, it wasn't a lot of people who looked like me. So here I am, helicoptered in, but I knew so I used to be their customers. I was a writer, a technical writer, and so I would always be the person to bring them work. And this was back then where we didn't have personal computers. You had to take your written content and give to a writing pool. They would write it up, literally type it up, and give you back papers that you'd have to then redline and give them edits. And so it was a very labor-intensive process. And now all of a sudden you got WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get on computers. WordPerfect and Microsoft Word, all that stuff was just coming out. And then it was, when I came in, it was actually from WordPerfect to something else called Interleaf, which was
I remember Interleaf. Yep.
Yes, teaching them Interleaf and FrameMaker. So things that were in order of magnitude more complicated than the life they had before I got there. And what I learned was listening was the most important thing to increasing productivity, because there's a lot of things that happened before 8 o'clock that determined what was going to happen at 8:01. And
Yep,
so
water
between-
cooler, coffee room.
Yes, so I learned to get there early and just talk. The door's open and let's talk about anything. And so when I first got there, it was, well, don't talk to him. We don't need him. Who is he? And by the time I left there, I was one of the girls. But they were the most highly productive organization in the company because they knew I had their back and they were committed to making the change because they saw the part they played.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. Well, and like Kathy's example, I feel like there's just so many pieces of that, Daryl, that really demonstrate how emotionally intelligent you were. I mean, to know that you're walking into this situation where there was going to be resistance, that was going to make people super uncomfortable,
Right.
because that's a leap in technology at the time. It's hard for us to even imagine like what that transition would have, if we had to do something like that now, it'd be really hard. And all the fears that come with like, am I going to lose my job and all of that stuff. And to be
Right.
able to really build the relationships with them and then kind of be there for them. So what a great story, Daryl. I appreciate that. Well, good. All right, my friends. Well, that's what I have for you today. I will follow up with the slides and a link to the recording, but thank you so much for joining me. I think next week I'm going to talk about succession planning. So if that's of interest, I'll be here same time. So yeah. So thank you so much and enjoy the holiday weekend.
All right, you too.
You too.
All right.
Take care. Be
Thanks.
safe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.